We are now welcomed by our favorite guest, one of our favorite guests. I shouldn't discriminate amongst our guests. Jenny Chiu is in the building to talk us through about everything going on in the NWSL. First of all, welcome, Jenny. How are you doing? Welcome back to the show. You're like a regular on the show at this point.
I know, I love it. I'm so excited to be a regular, and I was called the favorite. I know you had to, for political
I know.
reasons, not
Political reasons.
choose, but I
Right.
appreciate it nonetheless. Happy to be with you guys.
Yes. Listen, and there's a lot to talk about, specifically the CBA. For those who don't know what that means, it means collective bargaining agreement. Now, last week, the league and its players association announced that the agreement that eliminates both the college and the expansion drafts grants unrestricted free agency to all players and includes guaranteed contracts. Now, this is a huge moment for people who can't really grasp that magnitude because it's a lot of big words and a lot of legalities, if you will. This makes it the first pro sports league in the United States to eliminate a college draft. Although it's not uncommon in pro soccer for there not to be a draft, all players now become free agents, with the league unveiling its initial list of players eligible to become free agents under the new CBA on Monday. Now, before we kind of cap some of the highlights, because there's a bunch of highlights that we want to go ahead and put a spotlight on. I mean, Jenny, just a general consensus of what this is, how people are feeling. This is a big deal. I mean, as someone who covers the NBA, it's almost unheard of to not have a draft, So this is kind of going against the way things are, I don't want to say normally done, but for lack of a better word, normally done.
No, you're right. The way that things are normally done in American sports, right? But
Right.
soccer, football is a very worldwide sport. And to be able to compete with those other leagues that are around the world, you have to kind of understand that they don't have a draft. They have nothing like that. You're going into the pro and the academy, making you a pro way earlier than that. And
Right.
we've seen within MLS in America that maybe we need to be done with that. And so now we see NWSL getting rid of the draft altogether. So this is a huge moment, and it maybe wouldn't make sense in an NBA or a WNBA kind of moment, but for soccer, it absolutely is the right decision. And yeah, it's an exciting time for sure.
It's super exciting. It's more like you said, the international way of doing things. I mean, we hear about some of the biggest names, in football overseas across the pond joining soccer clubs as early as 15, 14 years old. So this is definitely not unheard of in every other part of the world. So some of the highlights of this change, it raises the minimum salary and the salary cap. The cap will increase each year based on league revenues. Includes revenue sharing, no limit on individual players' max salaries. So I know the players are thrilled with that. Chartered flights allowed for up to 6 legs within the league season. Additional charter flights are required in different scenarios, including for midweek games. So that's beneficial as well. All trade and transfers now require player consent. First and foremost, I mean, that is what we like to call a no trade clause in the NBA. That is major to go ahead and have a say so in where you end up, where you don't end up is
Mhm.
absolutely huge. I mean, Alicia, we cover this a lot in the basketball world. It is not unheard of for an organization, a franchise to do what's best for the franchise, regardless of how loyal a player has been to that organization, how many years they've been in that organization.
Well,
You
and
know,
actually, I was actually going to say when I
yeah,
worked in the NBA, that was one of the things I absolutely hated was that
yeah,
a
I'm
player could
sure.
get traded in the middle of a game, right before a game, wherever, whatever time, there was no say in it. It
Yeah.
happened at will. And then that whole entire family, that we knew and we loved and they
Hmm.
loved us, they were just gone,
Think
and
about
it was,
think about Drew Holiday and how he got traded from Milwaukee, and the next day, an entire front page article in the local newspaper was just detailing how much he loves the city and wants to stay in the city and his family loves it. And he was
What?
no longer a Buck, which is just crazy. So, I mean, Jenny, let's work backwards a little bit. First, let's talk about the fact that players now have consent and a say so in their future, in their careers. That's
Oh,
huge.
the way that you kind of said that they could be traded within a game, right before a game, after a game, like that is so hard and it's so difficult, especially you're talking about NBA, right? Like that's more your guys' realm. you have money to relocate, you have money to kind of like have people put things in order for you. When you're talking about an NWSL salary and you're picking up and moving and getting your life together with barely any money to kind of make a living wage, talk about the amount of money. I know you mentioned the minimum salary raising. When I came out, when I came out of college, not to age myself, but the minimum salary was 16K. 16K for an entire year. How much
Wow.
really do anything? And then now you're asked to pick up and leave and go, break a living contract and then go to another team. I mean, there's so much involved there. And that minimum salary now is raised to 40K this year, right? And that will continue to raise with the increase of revenue that NWSL makes. But yes, the fact that these players have agency, they have autonomy, they get to decide. The elimination of the draft adds to that. Free agency, no trades without player consent. All three of those go into the player having power, and that's exactly what you need. And then that forces clubs to have to be attracted to these players, right? Because if you want the top players in the league, you want the best players. You have to have good facilities, you have to have good standards as a workplace, good resources, all aspects of what goes into a player's decision of where they're going to play has to be at a high level. So now all of these teams are going to be fighting to make sure that their team is attractive and it's a good workplace to go to. That raises the standard across the league, across all teams, and makes everything better for everybody, honestly.
Well, and Jenny, you talked a little bit about revenue sharing. When you just said that, you talked about revenue sharing. Can you break that down? Because I don't think people really understand what that is and what goes into that.
Okay, beautiful. So we'll talk about the money aspect later because some of the things are easier to understand. Like I mentioned, the 16K to now 40K.
Right.
Before we were living with host families, and now they have, they're paying for housing as well. So all of that compensation stuff has been covered, and people kind of understand all that. I kind of got into the weeds of what revenue sharing means because I wasn't actually totally sure what that meant until I go into this.
We love someone who does their research. Go ahead now.
Thanks. Okay, so one of the big things is that there is going to be a minimum spend. So for example, they have the exact numbers, right? The base salary cap each year has been laid out for these years. So 2025 is going to be 3.3 million, and now there will be a minimum spend for these clubs. So yes, your base salary cap is 3.3, but if you spend, say, right, they haven't released this number yet, they haven't decided, or they haven't released it because the contract itself hasn't been released. We're going to say 2.6 million. Say that the club spends 2.6 million. Okay, half of the teams spend 2.6 million on their team, their players, their contracts, whatever it may be. They now opt in or qualify for a minimum $200,000 revenue share, right? That's right now, at least it's going to be, at least is what it lays out as, $200,000 base salary cap each year. So then that now $200,000 goes into a pool to be able to be available for the players.
Okay.
So now these players, because if the team, right, that means that you want your team to go ahead and spend the amount of money that the NWSL is going to lay out. We're giving the example of 2.6 million. If they hit that, then they are opting into this $200,000 extra money they will have to spread between their players, right? That then depends on the contract, on how that, gets determined. But the fact that they opt into that extra money is massive. So you want your team to do that. It's not automatic though, right? So these teams have to spend the money to have more money for their players, which means you're spending more money, you're getting better players, you're getting better facilities, better, resources for these teams. And so that's how the revenue share works. It's not like an automatic, like the NWSL makes more money, so the players make more money. It's yes, but no, right? Like there is opting into it. You have to, as a club, hit the minimum, and the minimum hasn't been released yet. But if it's 3.3 is the cap, then you're thinking, within the 2 point something range. So that was incredibly interesting to understand. Does that make sense? That like then incentivizes the teams to pay players more,
Right.
and then gives them more money available to pay the players after.
It definitely makes sense. I do think that, when you start talking about revenue sharing, there are some leagues and there are some teams who are kind of against it, because when you talk about certain leagues, for example, there are some that make just a quadruple,
Right.
triple, double, like you put the number on it. They're like the top earners when it comes to league. When you think NFL, you think like the Dallas Cowboys. You think basketball, you think like the Lakers. And, when you think about the WNBA, it's the Aces. And then it's a drastic fall off between, I think the Dallas Wings actually are number one now, Alicia, because of their recent investors and things like that. So when you look at that, what is making a team, a club rather, that's like a top earner and really bringing in most of that revenue? Are they now responsible then for the clubs that necessarily don't? Because that's sometimes where things get, I feel like, a little muddied, a little sticky. You feel like, or some franchises will feel like, well, we're kind of holding down the fort for everybody else, and that's not really
No,
fair.
because
Like,
it's
why?
by club. So you
Okay.
don't automatically opt in. So yes, when you were saying like you have to spend an X amount of money, it's by club. So not every club is going to qualify if they're not spending the money. So yes,
Ah,
it makes sense
okay.
because you're talking about the earners are these higher clubs, so for example, the newer clubs that came into the league. But to buy into the league was so expensive and they had the money
Mhm.
to do it in comparison to the teams that had been there forever and didn't have any money. Yes, there is a discrepancy in that. But if you want your team to be competitive, you have to be able to spend the money to get these players and to have the resources so that players want to come to you. Now, with the players having more agency as well, that makes
Yeah.
you even more likely to put the money involved to get the players that you need. When you say, okay, I have a locker room that looks like a high school locker room, come be a professional soccer player here. Who's going to want to go play there? When you
You're
say, I
right.
have the same locker room as Real Madrid and I'll give you a hotel room the night before, like
And your
you're
individual
trying to amp up.
suites and all that
All
good
this
stuff.
does, Ashley, is
Yeah.
improve things for the players. Like
Yeah.
everyone winning here is the players.
Yeah, they're definitely winning on every single level. And one thing I really loved about this was that it was really proactive instead of reactive, right? Like
Mm.
they weren't just waiting for, oh, we have this deadline, let's just throw this, in or sign this or not put a lot of thought into it or give the players what they should have. It really was what they deserve, you know?
Right. So it
And
being league led is a wonderful thing to point out, Alicia. The fact that NWSL apparently came to the table to meet with NWSLPA is huge because that seems like it's all in good intent. But then you have to think about like why would they do this? And one of the things is like the landmark media deal is 40
Mhm.
times greater than it had previously been. So the amount of money that they have, like you need to be sharing that with the people that are actually creating the product, right? So to go from
absolutely.
40 times greater in terms of this media deal. So yeah, I mean, you want to be able to support the players to have living wages. And now we're seeing that, right? We're seeing that increase in compensation across the board. And then the revenue sharing aspect is something that I find incredibly interesting. And I know that it's, more available in NBA, you see things like that. But to now have it on the NWSL front, that makes all the players, want to be on better teams, want to be, giving a better product so that NWSL is making more money, their club is making more money. It's just like it all works in tandem.
And when you
Right.
talk about that media deal, I mean, the CBA expires in 2030 and the current rights deal expires the following 2027 season. So it's definitely something that was well thought out, was well planned out to all kind of, follow a chronological order of events to better the league as a whole. But I mean, let's talk about the negotiating power of this all. I mean, not only from a player standpoint, but from a league standpoint as well. I mean, now the league, I feel like, is in a great position to kind of, make sure that they get the best media package that they possibly can to showcase what they're doing. And there's been a significant growth that the metrics will back that up. And you at least hope that the people making those decisions look at everything as a whole and not pick apart certain things and use that to determine what that next wave of media deal will look like.
Right. We saw an incredible increase in viewership across the years that CBS had the rights for NWSL. And that then opens the door for this 40 times the amount of money media deal, right? Because these business people are not making decisions out of the goodness of their heart. They're making it because there's actually a product that is selling. We're seeing this in the
Right.
WNBA as well. And now when there is a media deal that gives eyeballs, that then means sponsorships come into play. So the amount of money that women's soccer is playing with is unprecedented in America, right? We've never seen this amount of money within it. With women's sports in general, like that's something that you guys have seen as well as hosts of this. Like there are now opportunities that we never had before, and it opens a lot of doors. It opens a lot of doors.
Well, and if I'm the WNBA and I see this, like I better follow suit because let me tell you, and the WNBA PA actually posted about this on their
Yeah.
social channels, basically saying like this is what you should be doing, okay? So
Well,
let's get this cracking.
I am glad you brought that up, Alicia, because this is a huge moment also for the WNBA because they can opt out of their current CBA in November. Which when the new media deal was announced, the change between Turner and all that stuff, the WNBA also obviously being part of the NBA was affected by that. People were unhappy with that number. People thought it could have been a lot higher when you break down the metrics and all. It probably could have been a lot higher. The negotiating wasn't the best, whoever was in charge of solidifying that number as a whole. But I mean, Alicia, I'll start with you. I mean, what stands out? What, as currently in the CBA for the WNBA, kind of stands out to you as a thing that you would really want to see the biggest change on? And what is your hope, rather? Because, getting everyone to vote the same way is hard. We've seen this before. It sometimes affects how CBAs are able to be moved forward or not be able to move forward, because everyone, at the end of the day, you want it to be a collective decision, but people got to look out for themselves too. They got families to feed, they got their own situations. So your hope, obviously, is everyone collectively agrees to opt out and put themselves in a better situation. So in a perfect world, if that is what happens, if you could only change one thing, what would it be?
That's
Only
so
one.
hard because there's so many things that I think need to be changed. Let me just
Okay.
make that clear in the beginning.
Yes.
But the revenue sharing is definitely something that all the players have talked about. Kelsey Plum has, this thing that has gone around social a lot, that a lot of people have shown, because what she said was, we're just trying to make what's owed to us and what's due. Like, we see the growth, we see what's happening, we see the money that is being, invested in and also gained with these advertisers, and obviously with the television deal, like, you can't deny that. And so we want what we deserve. We want that. And when you look at this with the CBA for the NWSL, they got all of that and more. So it's like, when you look at this as a blueprint, every other women's league, and actually more than just a women's league, I think leagues in general, right?
Yeah.
See the way that it should be done, and they see the way that, is it perfect? Obviously, no. Like, not every CBA is going to be perfect, but it's close. You know what I'm saying? This was
Right.
a landmark CBA that I think every single league should be taking a look at, because they set a precedence on how it should be and how the players should be treated, moreover. So, when it comes to the WNBA, revenue sharing is obviously a huge deal. But there's so many other things that they need to
Yeah.
look at this and say, hey,
Right.
we need to do right by
We'll dive
every
into
single one
that
of
a
these
little bit
players.
more in depth as it gets closer. But Jenny, before we let you go, I mean, as someone who's been in this since, the very beginning stages, and when people weren't, quote unquote, watching like they're watching now, and it was really a struggle to get, eyes and dollars. I mean, how special is this moment for the NWSL, women's soccer just as a whole, women's soccer players as a whole, and this precedent that it can possibly set, for the next generation that's coming up?
That's a great question, because we've seen so much change within the last few years. When we talk about this original one that was in 2022, which is recent, right? We talk about the NWSL came to the table and amended and extended this one. That one was all about player protection, because they're coming off the back end of all of the accusations of abuse, and not even accusations, of proof of abuse in different ways. So that CBA was all about protecting the players after that and making sure that they were okay. This one is all about making sure that what's theirs is theirs, and that they are, being given the needs that they need to succeed. We talk about that 16K difference to 40K minimum, and you're going to fight about that. Like the 40K, nobody's going to want to go for the 40K knowing that's the minimum now, and that there is so much money involved. But then you have more money involved with that, because there's sponsor opportunities and the revenue sharing opportunities. So you're not just capped at the 40 as well. I mean, there's so much more to it, right? But the fact that we go from a potential, closing of the league, even, like when you talk about those abuse scandals, that is a moment where you could have either that could have broken the camel's back, that, what, we don't want to deal with this is too much to handle, and so much money and lawyer and whatever is going into it, to now be in a position where they're breaking ground as a women's, sports team that has a new CBA that has, broken everything that we've ever seen before, and setting a precedent, for example, for the WNBA, is beautiful to see. And as someone who has always been saying, you got to give money, I mean, put your money into women's soccer, put your money into women's soccer. I've been saying it since the beginning. These women are amazing. This is a landmark moment, and I hope that it only gets better from here, because that's what a contract is, right? It'll only get better from here. From the CBA is not going to go like worse from here. No. You continue to make sure that these players are getting more and more, and providing instances where the league can be successful and continue to thrive.
Well, listen, from your lips to the soccer gods' ears, I hope they are listening. Jenny, thank you so much, as always, for the knowledge, for the breakdown. My math was not good enough to follow along completely with revenue sharing, so I'm going to have to go ahead and read up on that.
I hope that what I said made sense, because I've been trying to make sure I simplify it as much as possible.
I'm still the girl who counts with her fingers. If it's after a certain, don't Don't use me as your audience. I'm not the one.
It was the breakdown we needed, though, for
it
sure.
was the breakdown we needed. Whether we followed along or not, we needed it. And it hit, the message hit who it was supposed to hit. Jenny, thank you so much as always. And we can't wait to have you back on the show.
Thanks, ladies. I'll see you later.